Welcome back for the second day of this Vanderbilt Divinity School Mobile Institute entitled Community Issues and Solutions. I'm your host, Daniel, and today our conversation is going to flow into talking about some education issues and also talking about resources that might be available for people. Our presenter for today is Dr. Danielle Speller, who is the assistant principal for or assistant professor for physics at the Johns Hopkins University. But before we get into Danielle and her discussion for today, I'd like to start out by thanking the Vanderbilt Institute and the Vanderbilt Divinity School and Dr. Smallwood for this opportunity to present today. I appreciate all the people that also helped out, and I just want to say, I was reading off of notes, but from my heart, I'm very thankful. And for everybody that's tuning in, I hope you guys enjoyed yesterday's show, and I hope that today's show is going to be as educational and interesting. Dr. Smallwood, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, and how are you?
Reading off of notes. I'm good, Joe.
Let me just say that I'm very, very proud, godly proud of you. Your two PhD children have really shown out and shown up. And more than anything for me, racial justice is about opportunity and it is about our capacity
Hmm.
to vent to the world our lived experience. Because the lived experience of Africans in America brings about a justice that we must have. So thank you for curating this iteration of the Mobile Institute. I can't wait for this father-daughter talk and have a wonderful, wonderful institute.
Thank you. Thank you. And just before Danielle starts, though, for people that are watching, if you want to comment, remember, as in yesterday, you can always go to the chat area. If you have questions and comments, please leave them there, and we'll try to include you into our conversation. Good morning, Dr. Speller. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thanks. And you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Good.
So today's conversation, we're going to talk some about physics. That's the area that you're in, and we're going to also talk about some of your experiences that you had. So feel free to start out anywhere you want, and then I'll just ask some questions if I have them. But yeah, we're interested in hearing.
Okay, great. So thanks again. Again, my name is Danielle Speller. I am currently an assistant professor of physics at Johns Hopkins University. And the road to get here was really actually pretty interesting. And I feel like I was really quite privileged to have experienced a lot of things on the way. I grew up, as has been discussed, with my parents and siblings in rural Eastern North Carolina.
Mhm.
And one of the interesting things about rural Eastern North Carolina is the vast capacity for both the beauty of nature and the depth and the warmth of the people who are there, um, and the strength of education and sense of being that I got while I was very young, growing up in the school system, and not realizing that the resources that were available to the school system were not the same as the resources that were available elsewhere. And so I think that one of the things that was really interesting in hindsight is that I grew up basically knowing that I could do it. um, and really, this was instrumental on the part of my parents and also of my teachers in the sense that um, our parents made every effort to make sure that we had, for example, public library cards and were reading on a regular basis. We had a lot of time for creative play. So we wanted to go outside in the backyard and create elaborate schemes of things and explore. There were a few times when we got in trouble, like when I put boiling water in the freezer for an experiment. But aside from that, like we were highly encouraged to use our imagination and just understand the world around us. And when we had interests, they really tried to feed those. So things from finding, again, with the books or taking us to school opportunities and science fairs, et cetera, they really tried to feed those interests. Another thing that I remember is like very specific encouraging opportunities from our teachers where they didn't really, if they knew that we could do better, then they didn't take less. And a teacher who pulled me aside in middle school one day and showed me my exam and said, "You got blah, blah, blah." And I was like, "Well, what did I get wrong?" He was like, "No." He was trying to show me and encourage me that, I had done at a level that was very good and was trying to make sure that I knew that and push me forward and to continue to instill that kind of confidence. So I think that even as we go into a discussion of community issues and solutions and the things that we have to address, and I think some of these are things that maybe people don't even realize because of the way that they are done and dealt with. As Dr. Smallwood spoke about yesterday, in terms of not even realizing just how far out of the pot in some aspects the rural part of the country tends to be. We have to keep in mind that there are great riches in these places as well, and I think that was a really important part of my life. To the extent that when we ended up moving at the beginning of my high school career, some people did try to sort of warn me about the small fish, big fish in the small pond paradox. But I went to high school and, it can, like, the education that they had given us with the resources that we had available was sufficient to propel me forward. And by the help of the Lord, I did really well as well there. One of the things about that transition was going from the rural area to the more metropolitan area that we were in for high school, and coming in contact with new people, different people, new amounts of resources. But I actually did do my entire K through 12 schooling in public school system. And I mention this because I think that it will perhaps come back later in the sense of kind of describing my trajectory through science and math and the types of things that I got to do. I actually went to 2 high schools because of moving within town, and both of them were very good high schools, but even between those 2 pretty well-resourced high schools, there were differences in culture, et cetera, because one of them was the place where politicians' children went, maybe not because, but,
That's where it
incidentally.
was.
And and they were located in different parts of town, and they had, different structures, different programs. But at the end of the day, again, a lot of opportunities arose because of the encouragement of teachers and because of the support of parents. Another story of the things that were made possible, Mr. Speller here, my father, took the time when I was in high school to drive me to a local university to use their library. And that's one of the things that I want to point out is a lot of times, even if resources, whether personal or school district wise, are less available, there can be ways to augment that if people were aware of the resources that are available. And so I'd like to discuss and point out a few of those if that comes up later.
Absolutely.
And so that was very good. So I ended up getting a scholarship to my undergraduate institution. I went to NC State University. And I think that this is one of the places where we began to experience culture shock, just because having been raised in a very particular way with, very particular values or perspectives on education and who could do what. And, again, I think that my parents also did a really fantastic job for me personally of not over sheltering per se. I don't think that I was, but of shielding me from the onslaught of doubt that people will try and will assume that you have when you come from certain backgrounds, or when you're Black, African American, or when you're a woman, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the funny stories is that we ended up in a situation where a few of my classmates and I were, addressed with all well-meaning and informed that we were not selected by affirmative action, which is probably good for many people, but it had never occurred to me that would even be the case.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a little bit of a like, what are you talking about moment? And so there are lots of different moments I've thoroughly enjoyed. And I think I chose my university because of what I wanted to do and because they were very forthcoming, putting forward the resources for me to be able to do it and do it well, and because I wanted to stay close to home for undergrad. So I had a great experience there. And when I went to graduate school, it was also a public school. And so I had the privilege of being able to attend many different types of schools at different levels, and many of which were very well resourced. But it was a really interesting experience altogether. So I think I will just sort of stop there and kind of explain what I did when I was in graduate school and undergrad. So I got a double major in undergrad in physics and applied mathematics.
Okay. Just so people that might be watching, I don't know if it's because of the weather that's going on, but Danielle is freezing a little bit as far as the framing goes, but the actual conversation, you can still hear her voice. So we still good on that. But I just wanted to let you all know what was going on. And we're still here. We're gonna continue with the conversation. And I know up north, I think they're having some snow. I thought we were going to get some here in North Carolina yesterday, but we didn't, at least not where I am. So I'm good. I'm good with that. But go ahead, Daniel. Danielle. I'm sorry. I just wanted people to know why the screen was freezing a little bit.
I see. Yes, we did get some snow. It's
Oh, you did?
quite nice. Yeah, we got a little bit. I feel like further up north I saw some warnings that they were expecting, I think, inches in the teens. Maybe I might be wrong. They were expecting more than we were. Maybe not in the teens, but yeah, it looked like a lot. But yes, thank you. So yes, I was just going to explain what it is that I did and sort of like the field that I'm coming from and the place that I'm at now in terms of the
You were telling us about your undergrad. I want to hear more about that. Okay.
Okay. So I
I'll be
majored in
quiet.
physics. No, no problem at all. I majored in physics and applied mathematics, and the reason why I was interested in physics again was related to sort of the encouragement to follow the interests that I had, and I was interested in science and in the physical sciences from a pretty young age, in particular because I liked the stars. I ended up going into physics, which is related to astronomy, because it was, to me, sort of like some of this will be, what do you call it? Bias towards one's own field. So to me, it was a more fundamental way to get at the mysteries of the universe. I could explore elementary particles and I could explore the stars and galaxies. I could do everything from the very, very small to the greatest, most distant portions of the universe. And so it's a challenging major, but it can be a whole lot of fun. And when I went to graduate school, I continued in physics specifically. And again, with people who kind of are in your corner, I was in a cosmology seminar. And cosmology is the study of the origin, evolution, and fate of the universe. And so it's kind of one of those fields where you take the physics. So physics is really, to kind of boil it down, it's a vast field. It encompasses, I'll go back to that statement in a minute, but it encompasses pretty much everything from the way that particles move and interact with each other. And by particles, I mean everything from, atoms to cows, basically. There's a joke about how we also estimate everything. So assume it's a spherical cow. Everything from there to the way that to the way that I don't know, to the way that galaxies move, to the way that light gets emitted from those stars and galaxies, to the way to, and we can go into more of this later. I want to finish my sentence, I suppose. And what cosmology does, and astronomy tends to be a lot of applied physics in a sense, and so there's different gradations between the fields. So there's sort of astrophysics between astronomy, but astronomy tends to be a very ancient sort of observational science where they are studying the motions of the stars and galaxies and understanding sort of the way that heavenly bodies move and how the universe sort of or the universe or our local galaxy at least, understanding the trajectories and sort of gaining information about how the larger scale besides Earth really works together. Cosmology tries to take information from sort of those spans of things and spin back the clock of time and figure out how it all fit together in the very beginning. And so was in a cosmology seminar, which can sort of include topics from various things like this, and was approached by one of the professors who I believe what happened was we were having a discussion and I'd asked a question or something, but he invited me to spend time with his research group. And this is the group that I ended up working with. And what this group did was search for dark matter. So dark matter is actually sort of a cool name for what might more accurately be termed invisible matter. And the idea is that when you look at those observations that I spoke about from astronomy, and you take a physical law like Newton's law of gravitation, and you try to, and when you also maybe calculate, how much light you expect to correspond to the stars that are in the sky, and you also sort of measure the speed of the stars as they move across the sky. Turns out that the amount of light that you measure when you look out there, and the amount of mass or matter that you would expect to produce that amount of light, and the speed that the stars are moving, and the amount of matter that would be necessary for them to still be part of the galaxy and not just go whizzing by, then the numbers are mismatched. And they're mismatched in enough magnitude that it seems to be as though there's a large amount of mass that is needed to sort of make up the difference. But it's not mass that interacts with us in the same way as the other particles that we're more familiar with in the universe. So, and the standard model of particle physics, to sort of jump over to explain that for a moment, is basically a collection of laws that only uses about 17 fundamental particles to describe everything from the table that I'm sitting at to the chair I'm sitting on to the way the sun works to, pretty much everything that we can see. And so the weird behaviors that are necessary to explain this invisible mass, the collection of those behaviors don't really work in such a way that any of the particles we're familiar with could explain it. So the idea is we already know that even though we can, say all of this stuff, this wonderful stuff with our standard model of particle physics, there's lots of things that are not included in it. So we know that there has to be additional laws and additional rules. And so the idea is that you can make an extension. Those extensions tend to predict more particles. And sometimes those particles have the right properties to make up this invisible mass.
Just say something right quick. For people watching, we watched a lot of Star Trek in our house. We watched a lot of space shows, and Danny took it serious. Okay, so the thing is, she likes to figure out what makes things work and how things relate to each other, and that's what she's talking about now. She and I have like offline discussions sometimes. I try to follow her. I'm more of a down to earth, straight talking person, but she goes into like why things do what they do, and so her particular expertise is something that really smart people figure out, like how do you get internet, or how do you the fields that she's in basically break it down so that people can enjoy things like internet, like the microwave, talking on the cell phone, doing all these other different things that folks do. So folks like Danny, some of the jokes that they tell are like it was over my head what she was saying a while ago. But the things that she does help figure out what makes the world a better place. And the thing about dark matter is like what you were just saying, is it's like if you have a jar full of marbles, right? You see the marbles, you see the jar, but you don't see the space in between. Is that basically kind of in that particular field, or like
It's
the air that's in there, or is it? Go ahead, I'm listening.
it's a little bit different than that, but what I do really appreciate you bringing out, and what is part of the point of what I want to say, is that even though we're discussing all of, this sort of esoteric, why should we care today kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, a lot of times the instruments and the techniques and stuff that are built to try to look for this weird stuff and get money
Mm-hmm.
to do so then go on to other fields to be used there. They kind of like maybe get their start because we're trying to build a detector that can't see an energy of above, this little tiny speck of an amount. But then once we built that detector, it's such a good detector. Why don't you use it to look for emissions that could be coming from like a weapon or something? Or why don't you use this to look for this environmental thing? Or, which is also really pertinent today, um, the amount of, so let's say, for example, you build this detector, you get a bunch of clicks or you get a bunch of, squiggles and stuff, and you have to pick out from that, well, what's the actual thing that you're looking for that would tell you that your theory might be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you analyze that data? Those and how much data are you getting? Like
Mm-hmm.
the huge amounts of data that come out of places like CERN in Switzerland, the high energy colliders, and experiments like mine, which are lower energy but are still trying to like take a bunch of data so they can look for things that only happen once in like 10 to the 27 years, for example. You can't go through that piece by piece. So somebody has to develop the techniques and algorithms that are able to identify a signal with a certain amount of certainty and say, we're 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 real confident that this is what we're looking for out of a sea of things that all look the same. Those are the kinds of data analysis techniques and stuff that then get used in other places, and the people who develop them, whether or not they decide they're going to continue in physics and academia, oftentimes go on to get jobs at places like Google or in the government or in other industries or in higher levels of academia. And then those are the people who are making the decisions, and
Mm-hmm.
those are the people who are influencing the distributions of resources or the policies that get made or all kinds of things like that. And so when we don't have, enough people at the table, decisions get made without people there that affect everyone in the world. And then, you kind of have to move forward with that. And so I think that is a really good point that you made. Like a lot of this stuff, people, there's crossover with military funding, there's crossover with all kinds of places. So
And so, like, I know that you play instruments and things like that. Does that? How do you? Okay, so go into a little bit how all the other things that you do play into physics. Like when you are, um, I know you and I think all the kids play instruments. Was that
mhm.
something that really helped with your? Um, how did that play a role? I just asked that question.
Actually, I think that actually played a really big role. There's a couple of ways that immediately come to mind for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think I will try to list them really quickly so I don't forget them, and I'll go back to each one of them. Sense of community, um, stress reliever, and possible health benefit for me in particular. The sense of community is that, oftentimes when you play an instrument, especially if you're taking lessons, and especially if you're playing in an ensemble, whether it's a choir or the band, the marching band, the concert band, the wind ensemble, etc., whichever, your orchestra, or your the musicians at a church, you learn to watch and listen and pick up cues from other people, and you learn to flow with people. You
Mm-hmm.
have to do that in order for the sound to blend, and in order for your timing to be right, and in order for the cues. And while it in the verbal description it sounds like a lot, what it actually does is it often brings people closer together, and it also often helps people to learn to get outside of themselves and to anticipate the next thing. And so I really do think that was, and, outside of the performance moment, there's the camaraderie of knowing that you all have this common interest and that you all can do this thing well. And one of my favorite things to do is watch singers. So I like to sing, but most of my training was in a different type of music. And so one of the things I always admired was like watching people who had this sort of virtuosity control of their voice, riff together and sort of laugh and joke together and just kind of like flow. So there is a very tight-knit sense of community that can be developed both from this sort of common skill, but also there's a lot more to it. Another thing for me, I think I mentioned, I forgot the second one, but I mentioned the health benefits. When I was in middle school, I was having a little bit of an issue with like, allergies and asthma type stuff. And I don't think that I knew that was the case.
Mm.
One interesting thing that might be surprising was that, we had PE, and then I think I had band like right after PE. And so I would be like wheezing and huffing about it, and not really knowing why. And then go to band, and I played the clarinet, and it like forced me to regulate and slow down my breathing a bit. And I think that really helped because it was sometimes a stressful time, right? And let's see, the third thing that I mentioned. So I can at least mention, I forgot what the second thing, maybe it will come back to me.
You said relaxing?
Yes, stress reliever. And then a fourth thing is also the training and aspect. Relaxing, stress reliever. Once you have a certain level, I think people recognize that playing music is fun, right? Yeah. And it's a creative activity, and it's fun. It's fun to be able to play chords and sing along and either play like playfully or play seriously. It helps you relieve emotions. We all have an intuitive sense of the catharsis that comes with sort of like playing a dark chord or playing a really bright chord and, changing your mood a little bit because you're able to get that out. And it kind of, again, especially when you're singing like praise and worship. So I'm a Christian. Our family is, but I'm going from my perspective for real. One of the things that we're constantly exhorted to do is praise the Lord. Because it changes your focus. And one of the things I very recently learned is that singing tunes, you're like your vagus nerve. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's like one of the ones that's connected to psychological and gastrointestinal stuff. And it's actually a physiological, it's not just, singing relaxes you. No, singing actually does something.
It has the tones and stuff.
Yeah. And then the training aspect, when you learn to play music, one, by ear, you have to pick up on a lot of this stuff. But two, when you also are formally trained and you are reading music, you begin to get a sense of the way numbers and counts and stuff fit together. And there's also really interesting research on things that involve like group theory and musical theory and stuff like that. So in terms of like the mathematics of the way that music works.
So I was wondering, because I watch like a lot of those shows that come on TV. Like, I mean, I like to look at scientists and different things. There was this one show where I think I don't know if he was a physicist or if he was just like a mathematician. And he was saying how music, like the timing of music and how when you play music, then he started talking about how it converted numerically. So I was like, the way that the guy was thinking, it was like on a whole other level. So he thought, I guess, in numbers. Is that something that you do as a physicist? Do you constantly have thoughts about how things operate, or do you try to go through life like normal? Like, you understand the question? Like, is it something that you would, like, if you're driving, do you do calculations while you're driving? Like, how far am I from this guy ahead of me and all that stuff that we're doing?
So I can speak from my own experience. I don't. I don't. I actually, I believe I usually think in words, sometimes in pictures, often in pictures. what I might do in traffic is think a little teeny. Well, what happens is I'm cognizant of the fact that, there's a finite amount of deceleration that has to happen less, in a certain distance, and, things like that occasionally. Like if I'm at an intersection and someone does something ridiculous and, we narrowly miss an incident, and I'll be like, well, thanks, Lord, for your protection. And then I'll also be like, so who would have been seen to be at fault there? Like if they did the forensics and they looked at the skid marks, who was speeding and who was not, and what direction. Like I do know that they would probably try to do some velocity and stuff, kinematics a little bit, to just kind of figure out what the incoming particles were based on the relative positions and the outgoing results. So,
Okay.
I might think about that, but I don't walk around thinking in calculus. I did have some dreams in Python code one time because I was spending a lot, but that was a long time ago.
Okay. Hey, we got a question from Dr. Smallwood. She wants to know, how does your work and educational preparation connect to your spirituality, if at all? And then it says, and if so, is that a clue to how we bring solutions for racial justice? So, do you feel like with your background, well, I don't, along with the question that you get what I'm saying about that, right? But do you feel like the background and all the things that you've experienced, um, how do you see that adding to your overall able to what you like? Does your background and experiences that you've had, do you feel like they played an important role into you becoming what you're wanting to do and the way that you're thinking about things? And then if so, how do you think that can be turned into a solution to help like other kids and stuff? Because I know you wanted to talk about how people could access resources. Does that make sense?
Yes, and this is one of the moments where I feel like I'm thinking in several words simultaneously and pictures, and I'm going to try to address it as fully as I can. Maybe the place to start is that my spirituality informs me that um, God so loved the world that he sent his son, that whosoever believed in him would not perish but have everlasting life, and that everyone came from Adam and Eve. We are all one blood, and that we are made in the image of God. What that means is that my estimation of someone else's worth is not based on what they can provide for me egotistically, economically, or even emotionally. And what that means is that when I see someone, my first thought is not what can they do for me, ideally speaking. We all sin. And as Romans 8 says, fall short of the glory of God. And so there are many times when I'm looking at someone, I'm just like, I just need you to do this thing, and then we don't have to talk, right? Like, and that's not that's not necessarily a good place to be. But the reason why this comes into what we're talking about here is that when we are talking about solutions for racial injustice, there are a lot of ways. So I'm thinking about a conversation that Dr. Speller and I had very recently about how for us, people are not just data points, right? So when you grow up in places where your neighbors are the people who are in, this group of people does A, and this group of people does B, and this group of people does C, and we can just redraw these lines, and, it doesn't affect the people who are doing the things. And but it very much affects the real day-to-day lives and livelihoods and health and well-being of the people that are the points on the map or the points in the bar chart, right? And so it means that for us, a lot of the questions that get raised and debated and bandied about are not academic. So when, for example, we talk about AI and machine learning, from most immediately for me, it's a discussion that I had recently was, okay, so how can we use AI to calibrate the detectors better so that we're not losing channels and we can get all the data and make sure that we can see our signal. What it means in the broader sense is, okay, this tool works pretty good enough. We can pretty much see what we want. We can hone it to get it to the level that we want it to get to. That takes a lot of effort and time, and which means it takes money, and someone to do it, and someone who knows how to do it. And when I mentioned AI, I'm kind of using that term very loosely in terms of like artificial intelligence, which is connected to machine learning, et cetera. And so I should have more correctly said like machine learning, but these are very specific statistical techniques that are used to analyze really large amounts of data, for example. And so in the one sense, your head is in a place where it's like, okay, this is a thing that is really important for us because we have grants and obligations and papers to write, et cetera. But the techniques themselves are being developed and used to manipulate this data. And is the second question is the data good, right? Like who collected the data? Can you trust the data? What's going on with the data? For us, again, we can go back to the detector and figure out why it was unplugged or, something like that, right? So these questions for us are super important and highly urgent, but hopefully, and by the help of the Lord, no one is immediately going to lose their life and livelihood if they don't get solved. We might have some other issues and, it might result in lots of stress, but at the end of the day, it's not a subsistence survival issue. Now, if you take, and we can redo things a lot of time. Maybe there's not always the funding and the opportunity or the time or the inclination, but we can go back and refine the methods. And again, the stakes are high, but they are finite and they're not personal. When you take these tools that were developed to a certain state, depending on, what's going on, and you apply them to other situations, then you have to ask the same questions. But if people don't ask those questions, the stakes are real high, and they're not just high for a career. They could be the difference between life and death and freedom and incarceration. And again, this kind of goes back to, so who understands what's happening? Who understands what is good enough? Who understands the error margins on it? And who cares? And that's not a flippant who cares. That's like, who actually cares?
Yeah, it's just kind of like that. Like when they're developing, I guess, weapons in the military, they always talk about casualties. But then I was in one of the briefings that we were having, and you start thinking about the way that they talk about stuff is very clean. Like they're just, we're gonna have expect X amount of casualties. And this is like training. So nobody's actually, like you were saying, nobody's actually dying or anything in training. But when they talk about casualty, they're talking about either injured people, dead bodies. You know what I'm saying? You have to actually take it out of the surgical cleanness of everything that they're talking about. And I'm glad and last basically look at things as it pertains to people and not necessarily just data points or charts and stuff. And I think it makes sense, and it's good to know that as you're growing in your field and as you're learning more things, that you still have that concern. Because when you get down to like communities, like in communities, neighborhoods, and stuff like that, it's like in DC, the casualties probably are on the same equivalency as voting. You know what I'm saying? Well, how many votes are we going to get from doing this? If we just throw the money down there and just do this, how many votes will we win or how many votes will we lose? As opposed to saying, well, how many people are we actually helping and how many people are we actually going to be looking after or looking after for? And of the people that we're looking after, how does that break down as far as like, if it's Black, white, Hispanics, you know what I'm saying? So instead of them just looking at how all that stuff relates to communities, they just look at it from a broad scale of just data points and numbers. So I guess what you're basically looking at is when you're when you were preparing yourself to go to school and to look at the resources that were available, right? How did you determine who to go and ask, or how did you get to the point to where you were able to get to the resources that you needed?
Right.
'Cause-
Please go ahead. Sorry.
no, no, because it's important to when people are looking at us talk, right? They see a successful doctor, and then some of them say, "Well, I can never do that." But you're trying to tell them, "Yeah, you can. You know, you basically can go from the bottom to the top, and now they'll be here." You know what I'm saying? It's like basically they go in, they decide what they want to do, they keep the faith, and they keep their dream alive by trying to, um, like we were talking about yesterday. You basically try and you look at the way that you can go in, and you look at the way that you can get certain resources and stuff, and you just apply for it. So it's no perfect formula, that people follow, but it's basically you putting forth the effort, and not just to say that's that alone. And then, like you were saying about community, you reaching out to people in the community, and
Mhm.
then you try to help bring people forward as you can. So I don't know how all of that came out from what you were saying, but I just wanted people to know, the importance of how you can look at things from a professional thing, but then how it can apply to communities.
Right.
Because so go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was listening and agreeing with you. So I was thinking that this is the place where I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about ways that people can so ways that people can sort of take advantage of the fact that right now we have a lot of internet access, recognizing that again in some areas it may still not be the best. And so
Hmm.
kind of maybe just giving some pointers and a few lists of things that they can do. And then if they wanted maybe to reach out and contact the Mobile Institute or someone to get in contact with me, I'd be happy to give more information. But I can kind of start by describing uh, some of the things that I've learned after having gone through these, and then go into more detail from there if that works.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, and I'll be coming at this in part from the perspective of a physics major, since that's what I know. But I think that it can be extrapolated to a lot of STEM, and I think it can be extrapolated to a lot of just majors in general, the way that I will describe. So, in terms of how I know what people to ask, to be honest, it's by the help of the Lord that, we had guidance counselors at our school and people who were invested who were able to tell us. But I realized that again, there may be not a lot of staff available in some places, um, or again, you might not have immediate access to something. And so, one of the things that I would say that one could begin with is, for example, of the local library. So, with beginning there, um, it depends on what you're looking for. Now, if you're looking for materials to kind of self study, let's say that you're a high school student, you're super interested in a class, let's say, for example, like physics or a related field, but your high school doesn't necessarily offer that class, or it doesn't have the AP versions of that class, and you want to start to get familiar with it, there's probably going to be two sections that you're fairly interested in. One could be the popular science section. And the reason why I say that is because a lot of times these are books that are written that are explaining some of the most cutting edge research at a level that doesn't really require a lot of technical preparation, and gets people excited about what could be and what is sort of happening now. Something to remember is that when these accounts are written, it's giving you the most exciting and the cleanest parts. Um, Science is actually a really messy process. And I think that's something else to remember. It's not cut and dried. People follow wrong trains as a group for years, sometimes, only to realize with great persuasion that someone else was right when they were saying something. You can even find examples in the history books of it being posthumous. But posthumous, like after that person was gone, that people were like, oh, maybe they had a good idea. But the point that I'm making is like, one, kind of keep that in mind when people are giving you a picture of science, but two, these will kind of give you a layout of the broad overview of what's happening. But then there's going to also be another section in a lot of libraries that's a little bit more technical. And these could be sort of like the collection of books that's either like GRE, SAT prep, or they could be books that are more along the lines of textbooks if your library has it. Now, if your library doesn't have it, what you might look into is talking to the librarian, because a lot of them actually have partnerships with libraries that have more resources, and you can request that they request a book get sent there, and then you would have access to the larger body of stuff. Same deal for digital resources. If a lot of times when you're online and you're trying to, look up something from a well-known publisher or a well-known journal article, there will be a paywall and it'll be locked. But there are opportunities for libraries to have entire subscriptions that if you're on site there, or if you have the type of card where you can sort of log in and it makes your computer look like you're there, then you actually will have access to those articles and resources. There is also sort of like, again, the partnership where you can go to, or a lot of times universities will have open hours for the public, and you might not necessarily be able to check stuff out, but there are copyright law allows for certain numbers of pages to be copied at a time for personal use. And so that's one place that one might start. So like, for example, with physics, there is also a track that you could go where nowadays there are a lot of universities that are offering their course materials for free online. So I guess I can sort of show as a canonical example this really quickly because it is available. Let me try to share my screen. So I'm using a computer let me open this window, Microsoft Edge tab. I'm using a computer that I don't think I have put on any of my VPN software, so that makes it look like I'm at the university or anything, and I'm just coming in. They shouldn't know that I have any particular credentials associated with my job or anything else. And I am at this website, ocwmit.edu. So MIT is a well-known university, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. This is an open courseware site that they have developed where they provide links to their introductory courses where you can see, and this is free. There are other places that I'll mention that you also can do things that may not be as free, but that could be also really useful. But as this is an example, they actually have videos. They've got readings that they've linked here so that you can actually go in and see the examples. And physics is the type of field where you actually have to read with your hands to sort of build up the familiarity and the path of thinking and the experience to kind of like translate from one thing to another. And they even have homework for you. Let's see. I won't go through all of this. And so they don't necessarily have the solutions here, but the point is that you have the same materials that many of their undergraduates have. Or in this particular site is actually highlights for high school. So it is the type of material that many of the people that they are bringing in to their university, that the type of preparation they would expect them to have, or that they would want them to have. And you can go through this. Now, you don't necessarily have the benefit of being able to go to the professor's office hours or of having the classmates next to you that you can go and sit down next to and be like, what did you do for number, blah, blah, blah. How did you think about this thing? And that kind of a community is a really important aspect of it. One way that you can try to get this sort of by proxy is through sites that are sort of question and answer sites that have a ranking or a voting method that are reputable and well known. So an example of this for physics, again, and this could be a little bit more challenging in some other majors, but I would argue that for some of the technical majors, where I was making a joke yesterday. If 2 and 2 is not 4, then you're not really doing the same. We're not talking about the same thing. So you can check in this pretty straightforwardly, roughly speaking. Trying to find this example that I had here on the tab.
And how many colleagues, black females, do you have in the physics at Johns Hopkins?
So in my specific department, I'm actually the only one. I do have an African American colleague who is male, and so we do have some additional staff. There are some faculty in the engineering department, but overall the numbers are fairly low. I don't have the exact numbers right now, but they're low enough that there is a website that kind of is able to track from year to year the people who are graduating with degrees in these fields. And so it's low, but it's not zero, right?
That's you there.
And you can do it. And so actually that kind of brings up another important example. And I can go back to sort of showing resources and stuff, but hopefully that gave you an idea to sort of start with. But another important thing that you can do is develop communities of people of common interests across all backgrounds and ethnicities, for sure. And there will be people who are more in your corner than others. But there are also very specific groups that are meant to sort of like highlight and encourage each other. And so if you can, so as an example, you might reach out to someone. So for physics, we have an organization called the National Society of Black Physicists. And they, we love to hear from people who are trying, especially students and younger folks who are trying to get started in the field. I'm trying to pull up the website to show you again. And there's a similar one that I was kind of not an engineer, but we figure we were engineering is applied physics / also we are doing a lot of the same stuff and taking the same courses. And again, that was just a joke based on my field bias, but
so do you think there's not that many there because there's not that many people in the field, period? Or like what do you attribute to having, like you were saying, such a low number? People just don't take that particular major in school, or
one could argue that, but it's more than that. And I would really be careful about arguing that, because then one. So yes. So let's start from there. Let's say people don't take that particular major in school, but then you could also ask, why don't people take that particular major in school? And there is a lot of discussion about what is called pipeline issues, where women and young people and African American people and Hispanic people all over the place are frequently sort of assumed to not have the background, or sort of implicitly sometimes discouraged from pursuing, or don't get the same amount of attention and encouragement or immediate recognition, perhaps, as other people do in going into the field. And so there have been a lot of efforts to try to target folks at these younger stages to get interest. And then the issue becomes, well, how do you hold the interest? Because sometimes it can be like walking into the wind a little bit. So, your interest is there and now you want to do it, but there are both internal pressures involved that we can talk about. So things that probably Lass and Dwayne could give you a much more detail, but like stereotype, threat, and implicit bias, issues that come from you having to process the potential thoughts of other people, and the fact that actually places a cognitive load. It's distracting for you, right? And so you're having to think about that at the same time as you're rising to the same level of challenge as other people are, which is fatiguing. And you might decide, you know what? We have one life to live and this is nice, but I can do something else. And that's a perfectly legitimate thing to do. But it is costly to the field, because you don't have the person who could have come in and done a lot of stuff, right? And it is frustrating to the person because they wanted to do it and they just are like, it's not worth it. And so there are a number of different issues that contribute to the pipeline issue along the way. Another is, I'm trying to sort of like narrow it, I guess. So there are a number of things that could contribute along the way. The thing about implicit bias and stereotype that kind of unfortunately play into each other because people make assumptions and then you might internalize those assumptions. There are actually independent studies about how people taking a test being told minutes before the test that X group typically doesn't do as well.
That's not to tell
messes
somebody
up people's confidence, and it's a self-fulfilling type of prophecy type of a thing, right? And so then now the data points, and this is where you can get into like biased data, right? The data indicates that those people don't do as well, and so people think that their assumptions were confirmed. And but if you are able to have that countered by having by knowing who you are, by not having your identity in your field, that's a huge thing. So again, when you know the Lord, for example, you know that as much as you want something, or as much as you want to do something, or as much as you want to be something, your actual purpose for being in the world is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. There's a lot more that statement entails, but at the end of the day, I was not just born to be a calculator, right? Or my whole identity doesn't have to be wrapped up in people remembering me forever because I discovered dark matter. Although I totally want to discover dark matter and would greatly enjoy a trip to, all kinds of places. Let's just say
I want to go.
At the end of the day, what matters is how I treat people and how I go about discovering dark matter. If I am trampling folks and treating people bad and cheating and hating myself, that is not a good life.
You're right.
So what happens is, yes. So to go back to sort of like the previous question about what contributes to these pipeline issues, I would like to actually sort of just say that there are a few people that I could recommend that you follow who would be able to give you a lot more details. I know, and there are a lot of people who actually have been doing blogs, and there are a lot of people who are doing work. So, for example, National Society of Black Physicists is an organization that is sort of like actively moving to bring people into the field and to establish them and to, have showcases research and make sure that they are putting into other areas to establish sort of the lines of communication and of people that helps with getting things done. People like Dr. Charles Brown, who I think is a postdoc right now at UC Berkeley. There's like Black in Physics, hashtag Black in Physics on Twitter. And the reason why I'm mentioning these resources is because they've actually, they have done more work in terms of like compiling the information that has been gathered from studies by the scientific organizations that oversee pretty much the field. So like APS and DOE and the American Physical Society or the Department of Energy, the Science Office and the National Science Foundation. And, they are studying the problem to figure out why people may be coming in and not staying in the field, or why there still seem to be unfair advantages and stuff for folks, or why there still seem to be pressures. Well, I think that might be a better way to describe it, of people who are deciding that they're going to do something else instead of staying in the field, and what fields they're going to, et cetera, and what kinds of climates there are at places. Because university can be a competitive place, right? Like the whole process of many of these fields is you need to be the best of the best, and the best get to go to the next level. And there you need to be the best of the best, and the best get to go to the next level. And there are places where that gets tied to the amount of respect that you get. And then when you couple that with people's expectations of who gets to participate in these conversations and who gets to be a scientist and who got there how, that just can turn into a whole bog, a whole, I don't know what word to use that would accurately describe it, but there are climate studies of
Cluster.
right. Yes.
Gotcha.
And so, yeah, so it's not an easy path, and
Mhm.
there are going to be times where you have to stick it out,
Yeah.
and decide that you are going to continue and be joyful, or continue and take a cry and and tell somebody to go kick rocks, but then you're going to come back and you're going to
Okay.
refocus and you're going to do your thing, right? And hopefully you're not telling people that they need to kick rocks, but like, you might have to figure out a way to healthily express your, your concerns.
So let me ask, the organizations and the groups that you say are looking into this, are they looking into it after people graduate from college, or are they looking into it as people are like making their way up from like high school and then into, you know, um,
They're doing
type
both.
of thing? Okay.
And so that's the other thing. They're doing both. They're trying to address, different groups have spent a lot of time, or at least especially in recent years, trying to identify how to repair the breach of confidence that that our country has unfortunately had towards folks of color, and especially African American folks, and especially ADOS folks. Um, how to repair it on a bunch of levels, because time has not stopped, right?
Mhm.
And we're still dealing with the effects, and people know that, when things happen generationally, it just as the classic example of home owning being sort of like the classic means of the acquisition of generational wealth in America, but African American people being barred from a lot of the loans or government programs and stuff that enabled the purchases of homes in the time when home prices were accessible
Yeah.
to folks. Like, that doesn't just go away because you voted and put in a new law last year. Like,
Right. You
time
got like,
is going on. So a similar situation in physics, where in some places the concentration was for a while on, we need to get a critical mass. And so
mm,
there were efforts to recruit and admit folks in groups to make sure that people didn't feel alone when they were there. And
mm,
so that might be at like the undergraduate level, for example. There are programs that seek to increase the number of folks who go on to graduate school by providing, bridge programs, or targeted opportunity for you to look out for candidates who are coming from underrepresented background, and make sure that you don't just skip over their applications, that like,
mm.
that you read it, that who is, targets of opportunity is another way people are doing it, in terms of like looking for folks who are potential faculty and trying to like grab them and set them up, instead of just kind of missing folks. And so again, I think this is the reason why they're trying to do kind of like a balance between representation and active recruiting, and then retention efforts, like making sure that people have the resources. Yes, you can find people and you can hire them, but then if you don't give them money, and their peers have, a bunch of stuff and labs and stuff set up, they are going to have to both be actively catching up, fighting the wind, and getting the funding, and recruiting the students, and doing all the management. Like, and so that's another way that people are really trying to identify and move forward and like get the research. So it's happening at all levels. Again, it's an effort that I see Dr. Smallwood's comment here, is systemic, and therefore we need systemic solutions, correct? And I would agree. And it's systemic, and then it asks things of the people who are going to go for it. So it's a hard question to address.
mm. So let me ask you this then. So STEM, I know you wanted to talk something directly to that. Is that part of the solution, do you think, with that happening, or what do you think?
Can you say that again?
I was saying you wanted to speak directly to STEM, like the science, technology, engineering, and math. Yesterday I didn't remember what the E stood for in STEM. So you want to talk directly to that, like the efforts, or how, I guess, in school and how in rural areas they're trying to reach out to people, or
Okay. Yes. So let's see. So a lot of the things that I discussed were pretty STEM from they were based on my perspective as someone in STEM, but I think that there are so I'm sort of solidly, I guess, in the science aspect of STEM and
Mhm.
sort of also adjacent to the technology and engineering aspects in the sense that, again, sort of the similar training and was able to observe sort of what those students and now faculty members sort of went through, or the resources that in the adjacent societies that they had available, and the mathematics folks as well. um, I guess in terms of rural areas, to kind of go back to what we were talking about in terms of ways that people are reaching out. So one of the things that was really helpful for me
Mm.
was knowing that there are vouchers available for things like the SAT and the GRE. And that's
Mm.
also why I mentioned them in terms of the public library, because something that people might not realize is when people are compiling these test scores and stuff, a lot of folks with means are paying for classes and stuff that teach them how to take the test and teach, our review sessions and reminders, so that they take it multiple times. These
Mm.
tests are expensive. They're like $60 to $100 back in the day when I was taking them, I think.
Mm.
And so the voucher was pretty important in order for me to be able to take it. And then there are also subject tests. Now, a lot of universities and places are actually starting to remove the requirement to have these exams,
Mm.
but that doesn't mean that, if the scores are provided, that they won't, be seen. Um,
Mm.
and again, some people might just remove them altogether and not consider them, but it's still the preparation that would go into it. It's not just the test. It's
Mm.
also the means of having and measuring sort of like, okay, the background knowledge, because the idea behind them was to try to help people, well, in institutions really, see who was ready to go into their highly rigorous curriculum, right?
Mm.
And this also kind of might play into a little bit on, depending on your background and your desires and stuff, you might think about the type of institution that you want to go to, because some institutions have a mission for education, and specifically undergraduate education. And some institutions have a mission to go the furthest, the fastest, the best, and the highest.
Right.
And this is not a knock on either institution, but it does mean that their focus will be a little bit different. And so if you are coming in and you want that competition, or you're ready to go and you think that that will help propel you the furthest, then the second might be the place for you. If you're coming in with any kind of trepidation, or maybe you're the first to do it and you don't know all of the stuff that's available to you, that second institution might assume that you know more than you do just about the mechanics of how to get an apartment in a city. And that might consume 50% of your time in the first semester if you are still trying to get your life together, which is going to be distracting from your classes. Whereas
Right.
the institution that's like, hey, we know that this might be new, so here are all the things that you should know about how to live life, and then here are all the resources that we have available in our Center for Education and our tutorial center. I would also say that a thing that people might not realize is a lot of universities, and again, I guess I'm addressing university level a lot because that's my most recent experience, but they have places for folks to go and get free tutoring, basically from peers, or go to the professor's office hours. Sometimes, in some cases, the professors treat their office hours like extra lectures, and you might not know
Mm.
that. everybody might be showing up there and, getting insights and stuff. And you might think it's just to go to get questions, or you might go to get questions, but someone else might be asking a really interesting question that you hadn't gotten to yet. And that might give in. So like knowing that these are things that people do. I'll give an example of myself. So when I mentioned that I joined this group as a graduate student. When I went to graduate school, I was a teaching assistant. So I came in and I was given an office with other teaching assistants, and, I was doing my work and stuff over there. My advisor offered me a space in the research office, and I was like, oh, that's okay. I have a space to sit. And I thought I was being polite and like, not crowding them, because he already had several students. It was months before one of my fellow students was like, you should get a spot in the office. And what happens is that just being in the graduate office means that you're around the other graduate students. You're being seen. You know what's going on in the lab. You're getting like the impromptu training from just being there. Somebody's like, come hold this doer, come do this thing. And if you are just trying to be polite or like not realizing that that's what's going on, you can be missing a lot of the cues and setting yourself up for such and such is never around. My advisor wasn't like that. And this is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that these are things that people won't necessarily think to tell you, and that you might not necessarily think to ask or learn, because in my mind, it was, oh, I see there's a lot of people in the office. That's okay. I've got a place to sit. I'm fine. Meanwhile, there's a whole research group doing work, and I'm in the teaching office.
You weren't getting any on-hand experience and stuff
right.
like that. OJT, on-the-job training. I get you.
Yeah. So there's like subtle things like that. So I would also suggest try to make friends. And sometimes that can be a challenge, like depending on where you go. But this kind of all came from deciding what institution you want to go to. And so to jump back and answer your question about people coming from rural areas, I would say also, if you are interested in going into a STEM field and you are from a place that is less resourced, but you have internet connections, I would say start looking for folks on, and if you're a social media person, start following folks who are doing what you want to do. I would say that would give you a lay of the land. It will help you see how people interact with each other. It will kind of start to give you a feel for who is doing what. That will give you ideas about sort of how you might want to track your own path. So another thing that gets assumed is that sorry, I was looking at trying to make sure I didn't miss anything in the comments or the chat.
That's cool.
Another thing that gets assumed is that you know that as a young adult, let's say, you are responsible for your own education, and you know how to pursue that education, and you get the information from your academic advisors, and you make decisions. Now, there are certain things that you don't want to deviate, right? Like if there is a specific course sequence that you need to follow to get that degree, then you should follow the course sequence because you don't want to be missing classes that you need to get the degree and end up being there longer than you need to, or having issues later on. But there are some aspects that it's important to know that I think it was discussed yesterday or maybe recently, like knowledge is power, right? So doing your own research is how Dwayne and Lassiter put it yesterday. So it's very similar for education. If you know that you want to major in physics or math, and you know that you want to major in a specific area of physics or math, because those are huge fields. So first of all, knowing that those are huge fields will help you to orient yourself to the fact that you will have to focus, because you might be interested in everything and want to do a whole lot. And that is great. Just recognize that you might need to pace yourself and do the most important things in the time that you have available. That's another thing. I think that so real quick, if you're coming from a place and if you're coming from a place where you don't have a lot of college experience, it's important to know that I used to express it as my time is my own, but
Mm.
having flexibility is not the same thing as having free time. And what you have is large blocks of unstructured time. And you
Mm.
need to figure out how to structure that for yourself, or you will lose a lot of it instead of putting it to the maximum use, whether that's doing your homework, which in college is still important, guys, especially in the STEM field, or whether it is taking the right classes and managing to get in the elective classes that you want and sort of planning ahead for those electives. And people will try to steer you in the directions that they think you should go. And sometimes people will not give you the best advice, as well meaning as they may be. And then some people have other expectations of you, let's just say. And so you'll have to be able to recognize that. So one of the ways you can do research, if you're coming from a lesser resourced area, for example, and you maybe don't have a lot of people who have gone before you, or you are trying to get a sense of how to do this thing, is you can go to the college website, click on the academics tab that a lot of them have, and find the tab for your major. And the reason why I say this is that it will tell you what majors study a lot of times. And then oftentimes, depending, and go to more than one college website. We'd recommend that maybe you go to places that you think that you would want to go and that you would branch out. So there are different kinds of institutions. We alluded to this earlier. There are some that focus on undergraduate studies or undergraduate education. There are some that focus on research. There are some that are sort of a mix of the two. There are technical schools. And so you want to find out sort of like, where might I do the best that I can possibly do? Go to the majors tab, see what majors do, but they will also outline the course sequence. And this is helpful because if you are taking a break or it'll be a while before you go there, you can see what the courses are, and then you can start to do research on what kinds of materials they use. And so if you didn't necessarily want to go to MIT OpenCourseWare, there's free texts online, but you will want to know which ones are good and not. And so you could either sort of find on Amazon the textbook that they're using, hopefully for a lower price, or they may even post materials that they're willing to just put out there and say, give us what you can, or this is open access. And a lot of times these are from, at this point, sometimes famous people. So I'll just give an example, like Richard Feynman is sort of a really famous particle physicist from Caltech who did the Feynman lectures. And even if you don't use them to learn physics, one of his strengths was the creativity and sort of the ways that he thought about stuff. And so by reading his lectures, you could gain an insight, and he has a very, personable first-person tone is the way they're written in. You don't have to buy those. They're available online in their entirety. And also like some of the problems and stuff that they would give folks, and some of the solutions may also be available. And if you needed help on that, you could, go talk to your physics teacher or find someone online who has similar interests, or you go to something like the Stack Exchange, ask your question. Someone will come back sometimes with a really highfalutin answer, sometimes with a very straightforward, intuitive answer, sometimes with a bunch of non-answers that aren't helpful. And hopefully, with using Stack Exchange as an example, there will have been other people with the same question who will upvote the question and who will also upvote the most helpful answer. And you can then sort of see if you understand their answer. If you still don't get it or don't think that it was the right one, go back to your text and sort of like, so physics and STEM fields are sort of an iterative process. And that's also how the degree programs work. You don't start out doing the calculations for binary star mergers and black holes. You start out with intro mechanics, intro electricity and magnetism, modern physics. Then you go back to mechanics with a little bit more math. Now that you've got the basic ideas, now you can use more sophisticated techniques to try to answer harder problems. The second level of E&M, now quantum mechanics. And then once you have those sort of basic classes under your belt, which are common to all universities, for example, now you can go and sort of like, if you haven't already sort of branched off into popular or intro versions of the specific things you're interested in, you can start looking at more technical versions of the things that you're interested in. So I think that
Mm.
one of the things I would say for someone who is coming from a place that might not have the courses is write down what you think you're interested in or what you are interested in. I don't say think to sort of mitigate it, your decision, but people have lots of interests, and sometimes they realize that the thing they thought they wanted to do actually is closer to this other field.
Mm.
Write it down and then spend some time following folks who are doing what you want to do, following folks who are supportive. So you'll find that a lot of the faculty members of color will have links to the things that were most helpful to them, both in terms of research, but also in terms of support and institutions or other people who have interesting things to say. And then I would also say another maybe last thing, because I feel like I've been talking for a while, but I would
No,
also
you good.
say if you are in a place where you're kind of heading off to college or you're looking for research or something, email people. Sometimes they will respond. If they don't respond, don't take it personally. Sometimes you will hear side and back comments about things like someone just need to be babysitted, or I'm getting all these emails from all these folks. And that's true. And
Mm.
then that don't email those people. But sometimes you don't hear back because someone is getting 50 emails a day. A lot of them junk, but a lot of them stuff that they actually have to respond to, and they also have to teach and do all kinds of, and they just might not have seen it, or they might have
Mm.
forgotten about it because it got pushed so far down in the inbox that they saw it and meant to say something and then forgot. So you can try again, or you can just not take it personally and try, just, I would just say that might also be a really key thing. Like, I think that I found the advice of Lass and Dwayne yesterday to be really helpful about not internalizing things, because
Right.
um, you will hear comments and it will be tempting to apply them to yourself. And you can either get distracted and have the emotional stuff, and you do have to process your emotions, or you can decide that, oh, that's what they said, and then keep living life and find, like, it's not worth getting offended, because it makes it difficult for you to do what you've got to do. And there are other people who are very excited to be in your corner. So,
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
and
Because
yeah.
I was gonna say, when you guys were growing up, I remember, like you were saying before, some of the teachers, because Lenora, she was really into education and making sure that you guys got exposed to a lot of different things. And what they were saying, I think it was one time I went to a PTA meeting or something, and then they were talking about just being exposed to different things. Colleges look at that, and
Mhm.
even though you may not think you have the scores or whatever to get to a particular university or college or whatever, if you're showing interest, and then if you have, and this is my contribution, I guess, to the, because you can't, okay, we can talk about like racial injustice. We know that it's there. You know what I'm saying? We know how people sometimes play the game. They try to keep you out, but your job is to get what you're trying to get to. You know what I'm saying? So when people trying, like you're saying, sometimes they don't come out as direct to tell you what they're trying to tell you, but they kind of like talk, say, well, perhaps you might want to also look at this, and then they'll show you some little piece of paper, and you might want to apply for this. Do that. You know what I'm saying? Because they might be trying to tell you about a grant. They might
Mhm.
be trying to tell you about a resource. They might
Mhm.
be telling you about a pot of money that nobody else knows about because it just got out. So
Yes.
take those hints that people are trying to throw you as, sometimes not necessarily as a stumbling thing, but just seeing what they're looking at. Because like I'm like, well rounded, what is that? So then the guy started telling me, well, because like you guys had band, you guys participated in like just other things outside of like the regular curriculum. And they were like, that kind of helps build you as a college student, as opposed to you just going in and say, well, I don't do that, and I'm just trying to get it, you know what I'm saying? Just trying to get into school. So basically, he was saying that, or she was saying that when you're in high school, try to start doing things to show that you have, like you were saying earlier, a broad interest in things.
Mhm.
Because from that you can use that as a stepping stone in order to start building and trying to gather resources into doing other things. So
I would
I
even,
agree with that.
yeah.
Mhm.
That reminds me, like when I was in high school, I was part of I was a secretary of the physics club.
Mm.
And I don't know if we started it or if it was there in dormant or something, but like this meant that we got together after school. We had, had the fun social aspect. We had snacks. We built a potato gun and, shot things. Like we did little stuff like that was
Mm.
physics based, but that was fun and that was very self organized by the students. But what it also opened up was the opportunity for us to demonstrate that we had this interest, develop leadership skills, and provided sort of like the forum for us to be like, so then at that point, once I was applying to university,
Mm.
I was able to say I was this officer in this physics club and had the opportunity to reach out to a local university and say, hey, we're in the high school physics club. We want to come and can you bring us a speaker or can we come see this seminar colloquium? And people love to do stuff like that because it is an easy opportunity for them to make a connection with younger folks. It's an outreach education opportunity. Lots of times there's pots of money for stuff like that. You now know a professor. You now have a way to get a lot of the asks that I was talking
Mhm.
about earlier, whether it's in terms of information or access or,
Mhm.
understanding culture of physics or of the field that you're in, both the professional culture and the interpersonal culture. Like they have research opportunities and the reason why I even brought it up was because when I mentioned emailing,
Mhm.
I had the privilege of hiring a student from a local, and this was a student who's not from really an underrepresented background, but the student emailed me and was like, I'm so excited about, the type of research
Mhm.
that you're doing. I just want a little bit of experience before I go to blah, blah, blah. And it was, the public health, there was a pandemic. And so we didn't bring him on campus, but we were able to set him up to remotely help us program some stuff that we kind of wanted to get
Okay.
started from one of. So he got research experience. And he got compensated. We got to, work with someone and get a little bit of stuff done for our lab. And it was a sort of a cold email, and it doesn't always work, like I said, and you
Mhm.
do have to recognize that. But yeah, the interest thing is really important because it shows people that you're willing to sort of step outside of your comfort zone, that you're willing to take initiative, that you are willing to look for the opportunities, and that you're willing to sort of get your hands dirty and try and engage. And sometimes it works really well.
Okay.
Yeah. So
So, do you have any thoughts on, like, just from your experiences, what people can do, I guess, to try to start eradicating those types of injustices? Or, like, people that understand research, they could probably start putting that research to work to start calling out things, maybe? Is that one way or one approach, or what do you think?
yeah, I think that is one approach. So I think as you were asking the question, and please let me know if there's a different direction or more that you want to say, but I think that you can both say something when you see something and help set the culture of the place that you're at, which is kind of a difficult thing to do at times. And
Mm.
it's a skill that has to be developed. So it's helpful for you to have a support network if you're going to do that and learning when to say it.
Mhm.
Because, I don't know what verses, but the Bible talks about how like a well-placed word is, like
Yeah,
there
like
is a way that
soothing to
you
the
can,
to the heart, something like
yeah, there is a way that you can deafen the hearers, right? Like there's a certain amount of, I guess, uh, approach that you want to develop,
Mm.
especially if you are the only one, for example, or something like that. And this is not to mute who you are or anything like that. It's just recognizing what's the most effective way for me to
Mm.
use my time. It's kind of like in physics, right? If you have two things and you're trying to transfer energy from one to the other, it works the best if they're kind of similar in size or if you find a way it's most efficient. Like you can have a really huge thing and hit something that's really tiny and light, and it's, it'll go far, but it's not really going to do much. And you can also have a mosquito trying to fly into a wall, and it's not going to do anything to the wall. But if you like are able to get the things matched well enough, like you can have this maximum transfer of energy and momentum, and it makes a great impact, et cetera, et cetera. So if you can find the way to say something that will correct the situation in a way that someone will hear it well and actually act on it, and you can't always control people's reactions, but just, but so if you are able to stand up for people who are not being stood up for, if you're able to say something about the way stuff is being done that's not being addressed, or if you're able to bring something to light that people are not thinking about. So let's say in the way that hiring decisions are being made, or in the way that some new facility or some new regulation is being set up, and pointing out you're not thinking about how this will affect blah blah blah, please do that. So that's that's one aspect of it, is learning to use your voice to do that. I would say another thing that came to mind for me is being there and being willing to train people. You're not, again, and when I say that, I'm actually specifically thinking of, for example, like if you have students, right? So maybe you are not the one who's I'll use myself as an example. I'm not necessarily the one who's doing all of the coding for my experiment, and I'm not the one who's coding up the algorithms that are being used for a lot of the other applications that I mentioned that have broad impacts on society. But the statistics show that most of the students who come through physics are not necessarily going on to become physics professors, right? And so it's like 80, I don't have these numbers in front of me is what I want to say. That's what I'm trying to say. But I think it was something like, and this is of everyone, like something like 80% of folk go on to industry and like government and all kinds of stuff. And maybe they will be in academia, but they might not necessarily be the tenure track professors. They might be research professors, or they might be lecturers, or someone who has a different role within the university that doesn't necessarily correspond to making the decisions about how the department will be in the next blah, 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 blah years. And so if you do have that role, and you have people that are coming up and training with you and training under you, taking the time to give them a perspective on how they should think about how their work might impact others, even if it's looking for dark matter, but also how to interact with other people in your lab, how things work, just the ethics of scientific research, and what is good data, what is integrity, what is reproducible, like the training aspects that you would hope are happening formally, and then talking about how those have broader impacts on society and stuff. As they work with you, hopefully they develop that perspective and that inclination. And then when they do go on to these other fields and they're the ones making decisions, I would hope that having worked with you as they're in these other positions of authority and in these think tanks and in all these other places, you both could be actively looking for folks who are able to enhance the representation, but you also need to be doing the same training for people who are already well represented within the field, because these are the voices that will be most ubiquitous. So these are the people who are going to go do the science policy advising in Washington and tell them to give $50 million to X to do Y. These are the people who are going to go consult with the military, as you were saying. These are the people who are going to go to the food manufacturing company and decide where to put the next plant. Like these are the people who are going to perhaps run for office and make decisions about voting districts and redlining, and actually speak up about, you can't do that, because these are the people who will be in the spaces who, when somebody presents a graph and says, this is what the data says and this is what the statistics say, will know to ask the questions like, how did you collect the data? What were the limitations of that? What statistical method did you use? What were the errors? This isn't actually as convincing as you're showing us. Can you please do X, Y? The people who know how to ask the right questions that will call someone out who has an ulterior motive. And so I think that providing both the perspective and the training and the treating people well aspect also just makes a big difference, because when you do that, it's more likely that people who come will be able to stay and not tire of the constant barrage of hard work,
Negativism. Yeah.
negativity, lack of sleep, pittance of pay for some places, especially while you're a student, and kind of a thing. Again, no reflection on the places that I've been. Just it's not an easy thing to do. And if someone can come and be treated with respect, regardless of their current training level, maybe they're coming in from a new field, or maybe they're coming in and doing something new. If you will take the time to recognize them as a person, and then look for their strengths and train them to do what they need to do, and train them to do it well, and push them to do better, like they will take that ethos and do it for others. And there's just no telling how far that can go.
Instead of everybody just wanting, so I got mine, you get yours type of deal. Yeah. Well, thank you for your information. Anything else you want to say? Because what we're about to talk about now is you talked a lot about the academics and how people can possibly, I guess, make their experiences better once they get on the track to getting into college, and then going into certain areas like science and stuff like that. But I think what you're also talking about can apply to just anybody that's trying to go to school. Like they can, all of them can, like, I don't care if you're just going, not to put down any particular field over another, but like if you're trying to become a mechanic, you basically, if you don't have the flow, or if you don't have the scholarships and stuff like that, you basically can go to a school, go to YouTube, look at YouTube videos and get a concept down. And then from there, you start looking at how you can finance your particular, area that you're trying to get into. And what we're about to talk about now a little bit, if you like to stay, I appreciate it, is basically just looking at resources in general. Like if you're in a rural area and you can start out, some people don't go to church, right? But they know folks that are in the church, or family members go to church. So the church is basically people. So I wish that would be one thing that our communities could get to mind, that when you're working with folks, it's not always important to ask the question, because I've been getting the question a lot. What church you go to? I'm like, what does that matter? You know what I'm saying? It's like the information I'm asking you is information that one person could just provide to the other, regardless of a particular affiliation. So I think the resources that I put together is basically something that people can access just in general. And I think if our community could get in the habit of talking to people like you just did, and then sharing information and sharing resources and sharing experiences, that would be a great start to helping somebody get into a field like what you're saying with kids might be interested in becoming a scientist or a mathematician, but they don't have any idea about the course or the work or what it requires to do that. First learn how to do your additions. Because I have there was one guy that I saw when I was in Charlotte the other day, and I was going to, I think it was to a VA appointment, right? To an appointment at VA, and he had his grandkid or something like that with him, right? And I watched kind of how they acted, and it was kind of cool that he allowed the child to talk, and he allowed him to speak his dreams and stuff. But it was something that was said, and I think he might have been joking with the kid in an instance, but he was like, "Well, I don't know if you're gonna be able to do that or not." And then he started laughing a little bit, right? So then somehow the kid worked his way over to where I was, and it was like before COVID and stuff like that, right? So it was like he was asking, we just started talking about something, and he got back on the subject about wanting to. What did the guy say he wanted to do? He wanted to be a producer or a movie guy, right? And his granddad was kind of joking with him. I said, "Oh, yeah, well, I can see you doing that." And then we just started talking about different things. So that little word of encouragement is my point of, even if you don't know someone, but you're able to kind of feel that person's dream, that'll give them that much of a boost to maybe continue in whatever field it is that they're trying to get into. So I thank you for sharing your experiences, and I thank you for taking the time out to tell people about some of the things that you went through, and some of the ways that you handle some of your situations in trying to get to becoming a doctor. So it was I appreciate that, and thank you for participating.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no problem at all. Come back again next time we have someone else, okay? Because I have a little talk show that I do. So, okay, the last few minutes here that we're gonna do is we're gonna take a little time. I'm gonna try to pull up something that I have on a screen here. Hold on just a second. We're gonna try to pull that up, and I just actually want to show you a window. This is the publication that we put together, and the publication is called A Community Resource: Community Issues and Solutions. And so, what I tried to do with this particular publication was, I've heard people, and this is outside of the sciences and the schools and stuff like that. This is like things that people go through in the community because of COVID, because of I don't know, some of the things that people, some of the hardships that people have faced. Because you have a lot of people, even with this storm that just went through, you have um, different crises that people might find themselves in. So this publication, when I first thought about how we could produce or have something as far as resources that people could get a hold of, we put together this community resources, issues and solutions as a little booklet, and the link should be available for you all if you want to try to download it. And I'm just going to go through it briefly so that you'll know what it consists of. It consists of numbers, it consists of links, and different things that go directly to like federal programs that you can learn about, read about, and make yourself aware of, so that in case you might have a need, or someone that might have a need, will be able to quickly go to those things. Like when we first started the project, when I started doing some research, like what Danny was just talking about, and what Last, and also what Dwayne were talking about, is certain things you just want to go in, and find out about the resources that are available for, like, they were looking for things for their college experience. Well, you got people trying to get through life, and like one of the comments that I made yesterday is, when people want to talk with their friends about, I sure wish we had some kind of transportation. I sure wish we had a bus system here. I sure wish we had, something other than just this one store or just this one place to go to. Well, those are things that people are really concerned about. And coming from a rural area, we had, one store that I was very thankful for, that store, when it was not that far from the house to get to, especially if you're walking and stuff. But it's one of those things where you want to try to help your community to grow, right? So if you're the kind of person that wants to bring something new into your community, or if you just want to learn about different resources, I think this publication is a great publication to help you, because it's an ebook form. So basically, it's something that you can download, you can put it on your phone, you can have it in print it out if you wanted a printed copy of it, but it's going to be most effective if you use it as a download. So basically, what happens is, you're going to go to it, and I'm just going to go quickly here. Tells you about the resource book, and then it has links. So each one of the links takes you to a different area. The main topics that I tried to stick with were like emergency things, something on the national level. I didn't try to go specifically into like local communities because each state does something a little bit different, and each, I guess, state disperses its resources to towns and communities and things like that in a different way, right? So basically, I found out about this 211 number when I was doing the research, and I had talked with this one lady that was helping me out, and she was basically saying there's like an actual 211 number. Well, everybody knows what 911 is. That's your help. 411 was information. Well, this 211 number is actually like a resource that you can call, and North Carolina has one, and there's a national organization, and they'll help you get in contact to find out about things like your um, any kind of social services. They tell you about all kinds of networks that are available, and I think it's a great resource because at some point, what you end up doing is calling that number to find out about a need that you might have, right? So I encourage you to go in, read about the 211 number. If you're in North Carolina, you can actually go and check out North Carolina 211. And they tell you about, like I said, the social services and different things like that. If you're trying to get any kind of federal benefits, it's good to, like I said, rely on your local community and people in your local community to try to tell you things. But sometimes people don't have, there's so many people that are in need, they may not have time to address you specifically. And you may have to wait because everybody, sometimes they don't have their offices open now because of the COVID. So now you got to wait for an appointment. You have to dial up for an appointment, or you can do some research for yourself. So with this publication, I put in links to where you can go to benefits.gov or US government benefits, and they'll tell you about benefits that are available to you, um, such as your Medicare, your Social Security, and your like if you're looking for a grant or maybe a federal loan or any of those things. All of these resources are available. They're free online, and they'll help you as far as being able to learn about whatever kind of program that you're trying to learn about. So like if you go to the this benefits.gov page, they'll tell you about disaster relief. I know they had a section in there about disaster relief. You can learn about health care and medical assistance. You can go in, you can learn about loans, you can learn about the financial assistance, education and training. They had a lot of stuff in there about education and training. Some of those things may be a little bit difficult to read, but guess what? They have at the bottom of the page like a contact us section where if you click on contact us, they'll tell you what the person's name is for that particular agency, or they'll try to have a telephone number that you can call, and then those folks can help you answer some of the questions that you might not be able to answer on your own. So again, these are all things that are in the publication, and I tried to put it together to where it was very straightforward, very easy to read, and very easy to be used as a resource. Now, this section of the publication kind of tells you how to use the search, because like I know that sometimes older people may not want to even use computers, like as far as doing research and things like that. But on most browsers, basically what you would do is you would use the browser in the search window to just type in a topic. And what Google does is Google will go in using the I think it's Boolean search, or they have an algorithm they use in order to go in, and it'll bring up all kinds of topics on whatever that you type inside of the search engine there. And then that can help you get to a resource. Now, how are these things helpful? These things are helpful if you're trying to find a way in order to get a resource or to get something back to your community so that you can basically um, have access to, say, if, for instance, if you're in a rural community and you want to try to see if you can get a park in your part of town, or if you want to see if you can put like a playground in your part of town, or you might even want to see how you can increase the I don't want to say policing, but increase the way that your area is maintained. Like if you want to make sure that the grass is cut and all of that, you can go from the anywhere pretty much on the internet and then put in your town and your location, and then they'll start showing you some of the researchers I mean some of the resources that are available for you to go in and be able to say, okay, this is the person that I contact. And then you basically call that person up and say, hey, look, the grass is getting real high around the bridge, you know, that's on Route 42. Can you guys send somebody out to take care of it? Because if you don't say anything about your community, it's a given. Nobody else is going to say anything about it. There was a tree I remember at one time that was down um, around the area that I stayed, or tree branch, rather. But it had been down there for a couple of days, and I did a little research on my own. I called up the town. The town gave me a telephone number to call, and when I called that number, within about they were like, "Is the tree down across the road? Is it blocking anybody?" And I was like, "Nah, it's pretty close to the road, but it's not on the road." They was like, "Okay, we'll send somebody out." So they asked me where it was, and sure enough, within about I say a day or so, somebody had come down to that location. They took the tree up and they basically moved it so that it wouldn't become like a hazard for any kind of a travel or anything like that. So those are things that you can do to help improve your own situation in your own community. So it's basically, you don't have to wait for your local official to get involved in order to do some of these things. If you learn the right way in order to call up who you need in order to come in and do those things for you. So this particular area right here is about internet. There were some questions about how to get faster internet. Now, I did a search online, and in the rural areas, they were talking about there were certain programs that the government had made available to some of the providers, like some of the internet providers, right? So basically, if you call up the internet provider and ask them, well, look, do you participate in this program, or how can we get faster internet in the area? Like you call up whoever your cable company is or whoever it is and find out what their plans are in order to increase your service in your area. They'll ask questions like, well, how many people are in the area that needs it? How many people are planning on getting it? Are you the only one? See, they're going to ask you questions to find out basically how many more dollars that they can make. But at the same time, they're trying to find out, what the benefit is or the cost benefit is to them. So if they come and provide you with this, then what will they get out of it? And sometimes that's a fair exchange. So you just gotta be able to like I said, go in, look at this publication, and then just kind of look around at the different areas. As you can see, I just basically wanted to show you that it's not based on one particular area. There are a lot of different things that I tried to cover in the publication. Even talks about co-ops. If you're wanting to start a business, but you don't want to start it on your own, you could get together with some friends, some family members, and you guys can start like a co-op. So there's information there how to do that. There's information about schools. If you wanted to input about a certain type of curriculum in the school, you can read up on that, find out some basics about it, and then you can go back to your education, your board of education, find out from the members of the board of education. Well, how can I, as a citizen, have input on some of the types of curriculum that we have? Because I remember when we were growing up, we had something that was, I think it was called home ec or something. So you learn how to cook, learn how to write a check, do all that stuff like that. But that was way back in the day. But I think they took that out of the curriculum. So I don't know if they took it out because there was interest or if they just felt like they needed to go in a different direction. But you as a citizen have an ability to have a certain amount of input for the things that go on in your community. So this is just a quick little um, view of some of the things that were in the publication. As you see, it's not very long. It was put together more so as a guide than anything else. So I did want to cover this before we finished up for today. And so this is what it looks like. There's a link, like I said, on the actual, it should be in the chat. So basically, you can take this publication and just download it. And if you guys wanted to use it, it is definitely there for you to use. Okay, so that is the end of that particular thing that I wanted to show you guys. So I've enjoyed being a host for this particular event. I appreciate the opportunity again, and I hope that you all saw something that was helpful to you and that ended up being a good resource for you. Um, a little bit, some of the things that I do, I have like a internet broadcast, we got like a website, and I think that people like me in your community that you have, you can partner with folks like that. If you have a business, they'll try to help you get your business up and running, try to get things started, and try to help you get things going. You know what I'm saying? So even though you may not have the exact skills to do exactly what you're wanting to do, just start asking around, and you have people that are in your community that can help start getting things moving. I told Sue, who was very helpful in the production of this, that I asked her if she told her story about how she got her business started. Sue, would you like to come on?
I thought you forgot.
You know I don't forget. Hey, I'm right here with it. I was saying, how can I work Sue in? How can I work Sue in? So I said at the end of the publication, boom, we're gonna bring Sue in. So tell us, Sue.
Well, as I shared with you before we went live today, that my journey, well, to this iteration of entrepreneurship, because
Hmm.
I consider myself a serial entrepreneur, um, materialized when the pandemic hit, when the
Hmm.
shutdown happened, and I was out of work and not knowing how I was going to make ends meet. Definitely could not go out looking for work at the time. I've about 25 years of being an administrative professional,
Hmm.
and was out of a job at the time the pandemic hit. And so literally I said to God or to the divine, and just said it out loud, because that's how I talk to the divine. Like, what I
Exactly.
was gonna do. What's gonna happen now? Because of course we are worried. I mean, so many people lost resources and jobs and healthcare because of the shutdown. And I was
Hmm.
just like, what am I gonna do? And the voice said to me, use your skill set, stupid. Just like that. And because that's the language I could understand.
Hmm.
That's one thing about
That's how he talks to you. He talks to you in your language. He meets you where you are, and so
right.
you learn the skill set of helping produce. You said that you work with churches and things like that too.
Yeah, so it began. I told you about my very first client, who is a member of my church, and
Hmm.
she is a former professor, Dr. William Perry. If you're watching, she was like, "I want to start a blog." 84 years old. She said, "I want to start a blog. I want to keep my mind fresh." And so she was my very first client. And then once we decided that we could no longer meet in person, I was able to get my church online. And
Hmm.
we did when we were meeting in person, we would meet in person and go live to Facebook. So it wasn't a foreign thing,
Hmm.
but using Zoom, people weren't really familiar about how to get Zoom online to run their services. So that's how that started, and then it was like the floodgates open. So many people, ministries and stuff like that, where it was just like, well, how do you, can you help us? Can you help us? Can you help us? And that's
Hmm.
really how Kara Solutions started. And so it has really sustained me. I call myself the accidental entrepreneur when it comes to this, because it was not something I anticipated, particularly in this tech field. It was not something that I was on my radar at all, at
Hmm.
all. And so when you talked about, doing your research and stuff like that, yes, I am self-taught. I'm self-taught, and
You did
in
a
even
good job.
talk now I can speak on panels and stuff like that about this virtual space that we find ourselves in,
Hmm.
that is not going away. right? COVID is not
Right.
going away, and the virtual setting is not going to disappear. It will be with us for the rest of our lives, and
Mhm.
we have to become comfortable with being in the virtual space. You mentioned the seniors, and we talked a little bit about that before we went live as well. Well, how many
Mhm.
seniors were just really apprehensive and not wanting to touch it, right? It's
Mhm.
something that they didn't understand, and depending on how you were raised and what denomination you were raised in, you might see technology as the devil, but it really isn't. Yes, there are individuals who use technology for evil. That is a fact. But
Mhm.
technology is our friend, and
Mhm.
we can use it for good. We use it to stay connected, so that there's so many. And I keep bringing seniors up because so many of our elders
Mhm.
were just really cut off. Some of them were isolated as it was,
Mhm.
right? Being and not really. Some of them don't have families, and so they were isolated as it was. And to kind of help them get connected to their churches, get connected to their healthcare providers, get connected to other seniors, right? So that they
Mhm.
were completely lost. It's a work that is continuing, especially for smaller churches that
Mhm.
were really just like we're gonna still meet in person, which to me wasn't wise.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
people really didn't know, how bad this thing was going to be, and it's good to have faith. It's great to have faith,
Mhm.
right? But you should also have practice wisdom along
Yeah.
with your faith.
And like you said, it's the thing that we both do in administrative thing is to try to help people, right? And so that's the whole point, is to show that, like with Sue and with myself, I had an administrative background, but a lot of stuff you have to teach yourself. And so I encourage anybody that wants to do a business or that's basically trying to grow something from nothing. Like the Bible said, don't despise small beginnings. Be confident in who you are and confident in what you do, and then do it. You know what I'm saying? Just go out and find somebody that you can partner with and
Mhm.
basically can agree with, and then you guys figure it out. You know what I'm saying? If it's something political, if you feel like I want this to happen in this area, like we have the resources, we got great, things available. We got water near here. We got this. Why is everybody passing my community? That's what you're asking yourself, right? But if
Mhm.
you get with people like Sue, or if you get with people like Danny or Lassiter or Dwayne that has like the skill set of research, they can tell you what the possibilities are of making something work in your area.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
thank you, Sue, for coming up.
Thank you.
Huh?
Just wanted to add that there is room,
Hmm.
right? Yes, the market is saturated, but there is room. So
Yeah.
if you want to do something, you can do it. If it's placed in
Mhm.
your spirit to do, trust me, there's room for you to be able to do it. There's that analogy about the loaves of bread that exist on, on the supermarket shelves, right? There's
Mhm.
so many loaves of bread, but guess what? All of those companies that make loaves of bread are doing very well, right?
Mhm.
So just because you might be a loaf of bread, no, that doesn't mean that there isn't a market for you. So yeah, so there's room.
And
That's all I
and
wanted
the
to add.
thing is, from what you were just saying, because there is room, it's because some people that help people get folks that help them. And that's how it works. You know what I'm saying? Like even with the people that make bread, suppose there were no more bread in the supermarket, then
Yeah.
you find somebody that can cook. You know what I'm saying? The restaurants went from having to close their doors, then they became food trucks. You know what I'm saying? They started
Mhm.
running food trucks, or they started selling their goods through a window, or through, just saying you come by and pick it up. We open up the door and give it to you. And they had takeout. They hadn't thought about doing takeout before, but people get creative in expressing what they do
Yes.
uh, when the time calls for it. So don't be discouraged about not having all your resources at one time. I had a long time to really have to work through that, but now that the thought is clear, you just do what you do and be happy with it. And happiness is a great thing too. Because
Yeah.
once you're becoming happy with what you do, then the law of attraction kicks in and you start attracting good things. You know what I'm saying? You just say, okay, I'm happy doing this. This works for me. And you just continue and continue and you continues to grow.
Yes. Yes. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
And with that, we conclude. Unless Dr. Smallwood is anything else you want to say. If not, we're going to conclude this. Okay. She says no. All right. We thank you all very much for tuning in, and we hope that you enjoyed the Institute, and we appreciate you coming by. Thank you.